Liho. My parents are Vietnamese refugees. We left Vietnam after the war in the late 70s. It was very difficult for my family to keep living there. My dad fought for the South Vietnamese army, and so it wasn't an option. It was do or die. I was 18 days old when my parents left Vietnam. My parents took my brothers, my two brothers and myself, put us on a very, very small little fishing boat. The boat was, I think they said to me, barely 8-9 metres in length and only just over 1.5 metres in width. And there was 40, 50 people crammed in the boat. And Mum said at the time it was a do-or-die situation. So after, I think she said a few days, the engine broke down and they were just drifting. And being 18 days old and Mum not having any food, I didn't have any milk. So it was either make it to shore very, very quickly or we'd all die. And I think they were very fortunate that they were stopped by pirates and robbed, because even though they'd lost everything and you know, some of the women were raped, we managed to land on soil with our lives. We settled in Virginia, in South Australia. So when my parents arrived, they had very limited English skills, if any at all. Lots of cultural differences, so it was very difficult to find work. So we ended up on a farm, a little farm, and they were market gardeners. Experience of farm work would have to be probably when I was about 9, and we'd be out in the glass houses doing little errands for Mum and Dad, like picking cucumbers or picking tomatoes. My brother and I were the first Asian Australians to be enrolled in that primary school in the local area. Growing up, when I first started school, I was always treated very differently. That I'd have a lot of people gather around me and they'd want to touch my hair and my face because I was so different. I remember growing up, my parents used to always tell me, don't look at an elder straight in the eye because it's disrespectful. And at school, the teachers would always say, you know, if you respect someone, you speak to them, look at them in the eye. So it's just very small things like that. And the assimilation for sort of a teenager was very, very difficult. I didn't notice sort of the discrimination and racism until I probably hit my teenage years. I remember one incident. I was standing at a bus stop waiting for the bus, and there was a car load of youths. They drove past me, and one stuck his head out and spat at me. And I think, you know, it took me many, many years to be able to first retell that story. And up until today, I still remember it vividly because it was at that moment that I think I felt, you know, as a refugee, we were worth nothing. Back in the very early 80s, multiculturalism on a farm in outback South Australia was very different to what we know what it is today. Growing up, I always watched TV and saw how once you get into university, you could live in a dorm. So that's what I wanted to do. I thought this would be amazing if I studied really hard, got great grades, applied at a university that's far away from home. I could go live in a dorm, like on TV. So that's what I did. I ended up choosing a course in Sydney so that I could have that freedom and move out of home for a few years while I did my tertiary education. Obviously that was an epic fail because my parents, being Vietnamese, very old-fashioned parents, ended up moving with me. So effectively my whole family moved to Sydney with me. You know, at the time I was really annoyed because I thought, gosh, do I have to leave the country next? But in hindsight now, going back, I realise the love and the sacrifices. With nothing on their backs, they came to Australia and settled in South Australia, and for 18 years that's all they knew, was living on a farm. and being in this very small city. They were not used to interacting with a lot of Asian people, and coming to obviously Sydney, living in Fairfield and going to Cabramatta, it was like a fish in water. They loved it. Every day we would drive out here and just to hang around in front of where the Commonwealth Bank is now and just sit there all day, every day, just watching people. I've seen the change in them, and they've been able to embrace their culture. They cook dishes that previously I'd never eaten because it wasn't available in Adelaide. So I think it's very important to not forget our roots, where we came from. I identify myself as Vietnamese Australian, so I think it's very important that I speak fluently in both languages, and very proud so. Several years ago I purchased a home out near Drummoyne. They didn't want to move. They were adamant that they were going to stay in Fairfield because this is where they love and where they want to be. I've come to accept and realise how very fortunate and lucky I am to grow up in a country that's so tolerant and so multicultural. Australia provides opportunities both in employment, in education, that sometimes we do take for granted when we live here. But when you travel overseas and come back home, I think the sense of overwhelming gratitude you feel for a country that gives so much and expects so little in return. In my first year of university, I enrolled in radiography. Obviously health science, because that's what was deemed suitable. And I didn't like it at all. I couldn't imagine the rest of my life sort of being taking x-rays. I thought I wanted more patient interaction, so I decided to change courses and I went to do orthoptics. After 2 years of orthoptics, I didn't know if I wanted to graduate, I didn't know if I wanted to go to work, and I didn't have a heart to tell my parents. So I ended up getting part-time work in a shoe store while I was at university. And when that shoe store opened another store, they asked me to come manage it, and I thought it was a perfect opportunity for me to get some real life experience, earn some money, and be away from school for a while, and to give me time to decide what I wanted to do with my life. And it was at that point where I told my parents that I wanted to defer for a year. It'd only be a year. I promised I'd come back, and that year led to me realising how much I enjoyed the business aspects of life. From that point on, I decided that I wanted to be an entrepreneur. After a year and a half of working in the shoe store, at 21 I decided that I wanted to go in business, and so I opened my first bridal shoe store. So after going into bridal shoes, I realised that there was a huge market for formal wear. So I went from bridal shoes to having some handbags with the shoes to several bridal dress shops. So they were all located within CBD of Sydney. Within 5 years, I grew that to 6 retail stores. It was during a time when I think we started to see a huge influx of internet shopping. So I learnt to pivot my business, and as much as I tried, I realised that the traditional bricks and mortar stores weren't going to work for me anymore. So I think at 27, 28 years old, I left university. I don't have a degree. I don't know anything other than being in a shop. What am I going to do with myself? So I went through a couple of months of this midlife crisis, and it wasn't until a very good friend of mine, who's also my mentor now, he said, "Lee, I've got this opportunity to get into waste management, but I have to go overseas. Can you come and help me manage it and oversee it?" So I thought, okay, what the hell, I'll do it. I suppose it will enable me to learn a new industry. If I'm able to learn something, get paid for it, that's a bonus for me. So I'm a big believer in learning. So I went and helped him oversee that waste management business for several months. After a year of it, the business was losing so much money, it was on the brink of bankruptcy. It was losing about $20,000 a month. Actually, at the time, I'd spent 12 months being in the business. I learned everything I could about it, and I decided to sort of take it over. It was a big decision because I had all these retail stores and I had this failing waste management business. But in my heart, I could see that I could make it work. And I think in hindsight, youth is a powerful, powerful thing. Because if someone had come to me with that business today, I would be running for my life. But at the time, there was no fear. I only saw the positives and not the negatives. And for me, what I saw was this amazing business that I could turn around very quickly. So I closed and sold off all my retail stores and I jumped in headfirst into this waste management business. It was like jumping out of the plane and hoping to pull the parachute out on the way down. When I took over that waste management business, my son was 6 months old. I was a new mum. I took on a very male-dominated business that I knew nothing about. I had a lot of back office knowledge because I'd been there for a year, but at the forefront, I had very little knowledge of the business and the industry as a whole. I worked very hard, 12, 16, 18-hour days. I remember during the very first days of taking that business over, I think for me it was do or die. So I had to let go of the admin to all the drivers. For me, I kept the bare minimal staff on. It was 1 full-time staff, 1 part-time staff. I assumed all the office work, all the sales work, all the accounting work, and I even took on a run. So I got my HR license. I think I'll be that first female in Australia to drive a garbage truck with Jimmy Choo shoes. I remember waking up at 5 in the morning, doing that garbage run, getting back at say midday, then changing clothes, going to see customers till 5 or 6 at night time, then getting home, having quick dinner, spend what time I had with my son, and then it was into emails, quotes, chasing up debtors, creditors. I still can't put into words how difficult it was being female in a male-dominated industry, but also being Asian in a very Anglo-Saxon industry. There are still today the people that have been, were, and still very, very supportive. But obviously there were people that, they thought, who does she think she is, kind of attitude. I think in any line of work, when you do your best, you put in the sweat, the tears, the labour, that doesn't get seen. What does get seen is, oh, she got that so easy, it must have been, must have been this person, that person, the other person helped her. I think there are many moments in my waste management career that I've had to leave what I was doing, go sit in my car, drive off somewhere, have a good cry, then compose myself, come back and get on with the job. Capital City Waste was originally based everywhere in Sydney, so if I could find somewhere to park the truck on the road, I'd park it there until council came along and gave me a move on notice, because I didn't have money to rent a yard. Eventually I was able to lease a yard and park my trucks and have an office to work out of. In the first 12 months of running the company, I worked out of the boot of my car. And so all the filing, everything was in the boot of my car. And when I had to send a fax, I had to run off to Fairfield Library, send off a fax, and then go off to work. So after I sold Capital City Waste Services, I thought, okay, it's time for retirement now. That lasted 6 months. And then I was on to my next project, being tea bags. It's a little tea store based in southwest Sydney, actually in the heart of Cabramatta here, which brews freshly made tea. I was sitting around the table one day with some of my staff and work experience students and my nieces, and we thought, oh, the Easter show's coming up, let's find something to sell at the Easter show. So we thought, okay, what are we going to sell? So we thought of all the foods under the sun, and everything was hard because nobody could cook. And so then we thought about, okay, what's an easy drink we could sell then? And we thought about all the things under the sun, and everything had a logistical issue. And in the end, we thought iced tea would be easy, it's just tea and ice. Within the next half an hour, we thought, what are we going to put it in? And we came up with this bag, this Ziploc bag that we could just open up and cart to the Easter show really easily, pour in the tea and ice, and happy days. And that's how tea bags began. Looking back, I think what I've accomplished through my working career, I can leave some sort of legacy behind for my son. Every time there's an article or a video that comes out, I show him and I ask him, do you know why Mummy's in the news? And he sort of says, yes, because Mummy's an entrepreneur. He says, Mum, when you're not around anymore, I'm going to follow in your footsteps. And I asked him, so do you know what that means? And he says, yeah, so it means that you're a train and you're going along this train track. So when you're not around anymore, that train track's going to break. So I'm going to put it together and keep driving that train forward. Mum and Dad are very proud of what I've achieved today. I remember back in the early days when I first told them that I was going to take a year off university, I think they didn't like it, but they reluctantly agreed because they didn't want to pressure me to do something I didn't want to do. I think the biggest blow to them was when I decided to go into waste management. They didn't tell me at the time, but obviously I could imagine how disappointed they would have been, because, you know, who wants their daughter to become a garbo? And I think there needs to be a lot more education around it, because waste management isn't just about picking up rubbish anymore. It's so much bigger than that. It's sustainability, and it's driving an industry which is going to be crucial to the next generation. I remember when I received the invitation from Western Sydney University Enterprises, I came home and I said to Mum, Mum, I've been invited to sit on a university board. And she said, how? You don't even have a university degree. And I think for me that moment was very defining, because I'd always been ashamed that I'd never finished tertiary education, and it was one of the things that I wanted to eventually do. But being able to achieve that and to be able to sit on a board like that just goes to show that through sheer determination, hard work and a passion for what you want to do, the opportunities are limitless. You don't need a tertiary degree. Follow your heart, follow your dreams, follow that path to education, and that path to education may not always mean a tertiary education. It could mean hands-on education. It can mean life education. Regardless of where you came from, what your background is, and your adversities in life, always use that adversity to empower you, to make you a better person, to strive and achieve more, rather than use that adversity as an excuse to give up. I think about what those very early refugees from the early 70s and the 80s, what they've endured to come to this country and to be able to achieve so much. Every day I wake up and I think there's people in other countries that don't have the chances and the choices and the opportunities that I get each and every day. And if I have to work hard, if I have to miss out on seeing the first time my son ate solid food, the first time he walked, the first time he talked, at least I'm creating something and I'm leaving a legacy for him and for the next generation.